Today on The Pale Threshold, itching your trigger finger, how to craft better responses to outside stimuli through discernment. How many times have you read something online that made you cry, whether from sadness, jealousy, anger, or some sense of longing you can't quite name? The potential for us to harm each other through this medium is surprising. Some days I sit paralyzed in fear that any movement on my part could hurt someone, and I might never even know about it. Imagine for a moment the sound of keys jingling. If you have aphantasia, take out your set of keys and jingle them next to your ear. The sound can be jarring. It might also have a melodious and pleasant quality like ringing bells. You might have a personal association to the sound, the arrival of a loved one from a long day at work, or an institutional reminder of stolen freedom. Context can be divisive. A stimulus may have overwhelmingly positive connotations for one person, while serving as a trigger to someone else's anxiety. It is not our individual responsibility to censure ourselves out of this fear, nor to try and craft a world where this trigger does not exist. The roots of that trigger, however, are a different story. These psychological responses become entities, the negative ones just more prominently displayed than the positive. How then to handle the process of curation? Advertisers might have you believe that setting forth an ultra-sanitizing criteria for publicly available media would cure all these ills and create a place where anyone could afford to buy their products. The past 20 years especially have proven this not to be the case. In an era where we are not allowed to speak freely about death and suffering in frank language, how can we expect to heal on a personal level? Where is catharsis found when we feel alone in these quandaries of existence? What are our obligations to each other? The obligation to be kind, the obligation to do no harm, even the responsibility to uplift each other as it serves the greater good. Discernment is required on the part of each individual to carry these out. Worse, that discernment cannot come from an environment tightly controlled by censorship. It is crafted in failure as well as success, such that when we walk forth out of the darkness, the light is our cue that better things are coming. Often our fears are irrational. Spotting wildlife in an area where that species is common does not mean you are in imminent danger. Only that you should be taking proper precautions, not just to protect yourself and your loved ones, but so as not to interfere with the species you observe. This applies not just to coyotes and wild boar, but also to our neighbors, even if they are housing challenged or drug addicts. The fear and anger responses we experience surrounding these encounters have the potential to make any interaction so much worse for all involved parties. The fallacy of the leadership paradigm. Failure is part of the human condition. As part of our coming into the physical world, we take on that responsibility and understanding that no one among us is above the intrinsic imperfection arising from physical limitation. Therefore, the idea of leaders and leadership as a paradigm and thus above reproach must be dismantled, such that each among us feels qualified to take more agency in our individual lives. Hierarchies in general serve no greater purpose than to disguise our own agency, especially in matters which affect our individual lives greatly, distracting us from the greater good which can be achieved when we become capable of orchestrating as a whole, learning our proper place in the grand mechanics of society, and utilizing properly that individual agency to better serve each other, without masters, but rather in fellowship. The ways we give of ourselves to others should also be seen as an act of communion. No one should feel pressured, forced, coerced, etc., to receive the communion. Bread has been one of the most important inventions of mankind. A shelf-stable, instantly available source of nutrition and sustenance. Wine and beer, in times when water sources would not be trusted, provide sustenance also. These two items in that time provided the most basic forms of sustenance. Jesus did not say, "Here, eat of my body," and provide a 4-course meal. He did not equate himself to animal flesh, as previous religions equated the flesh of the Apis bull. Bread is non-violent and accessible. Thank you so much for joining me today. I would love to hear your comments and thoughts on these matters. My Gmail address is Pale Threshold. My Instagram is also Pale Threshold. I have a YouTube channel at Pale Threshold. I really appreciate all of you who are listening and supporting me through all of these different avenues. And until next time, never fear the Pale Threshold. Today on the Pale Threshold, we are starting the Mind Control series. Today we're going to be talking about V2K, what is also known as voice to skull. It is the means by which many targeted individuals believe that voices are being beamed directly into their heads. We're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, a little bit about the history of using electronics to control and map brain activity as it relates to the possibility of having voices broadcast inside your head. The main definition that I could find for voice-to-skull devices was an archived post on the Federation of American Scientists archive website. And this definition was given as coming from a call.army.mil site, which when I clicked on it, of course, I was unable to access. The definition is a non-lethal weapon which includes 1. A neuroelectromagnetic device which uses microwave transmissions of sound into skull of persons or animals by way of pulse-modulated microwave radiation. 2. A silent sound device which can transmit sound into the skull of persons or animals. Note, the sound modulation may be voice or audio subliminal messages. 1 application of V2K is use as an electronic scarecrow to frighten birds in the vicinity of airports. So there are documented cases where what is technically classed as V2K is being used in settings to deter birds. You might have walked past a storefront where they were playing exceptionally loud music or a repetitive beeping noise. That's very common here in LA to deter people from loitering outside of that place of business. So I'm going to address this first part of the definition, the science behind microwaves and their auditory properties. In 1962, there was a scientist named Alan Fry, and of course the Fry effect is named after him. He published a paper proving that microwaves are detected by the human auditory system as clicks. The hypothesis is that is due to thermohydraulic phenomena inside the skull. There was an additional paper from the early 80s, and this was published by Don Justison based on his work and Fry's work and the work of the Soviets and some other people that I'll talk about in just a moment, Sharp and Grove. And this paper was transcribed from a lecture given in the mid-70s. So in Microwaves and Behavior, Justison talks about the Advanced Research Projects Agency, which the acronym for that is ARPA. They contacted Joseph C. Sharp, who was the former director of research in experimental psychology at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, and electronic engineer Mark Grove. They had studied extensively the biophysical effects of microwave radiations. So ARPA funding was cut drastically when the Mansfield Amendment was passed, which prohibited military spending on non-military related research. Sharp and Grove radiated themselves with voice-modulated microwaves and were able to identify the names of digits between 1 and 10. The voice they heard was described as similar to a artificial larynx. So if you've ever heard somebody who had their larynx removed and they have one of those talk boxes, it's a very robotic type of voice. More complex words were not attempted because exposure would exceed 10 milliwatts per squared centimeter limit of safe exposure if they attempted longer words or phrases. Now this might somewhat debunk microwaves as the source of the artificial voices, counter to what was given in that definition. The voice would be very robotic sounding and the microwave dosages would be noticeable. Another potential source of intracranial voice transmission, and of course this is theoretical, this is not verified, it's another option to consider. And I'll talk about the symptoms associated with microwave radiation, high altitude, and TMS, which I'm about to discuss here as I continue this episode. You will want to track your symptoms very closely. Any comorbidities that you notice alongside hearing voices inside your skull, if you are experiencing that. This information I took from Wikipedia. Transcranial magnetic stimulation is a non-invasive form of brain stimulation in which a changing magnetic field is used to induce an electric current at a specific area of the brain through electromagnetic induction. The pulses of TMS are the same strength as you would get with an MRI scan, and you can reach with deep TMS up to 6 inches inside the brain. The delivery system is two butterfly-shaped, it looks like butterfly wings or like the infinity symbol or an 8. They're called butterfly coils, and they are situated directly above the skull. This method, the delivery apparatus does need to be very close to the skull. Symptoms or side effects that are noted with TMS: discomfort, pain, hearing loss, inadvertent current induction in implanted devices like pacemakers, and a cognitive change, or even short-term elevated energy, which is termed hypomania. Very rare, you can get fainting or seizures. The next category of mind control potential devices I will be covering today are brain-computer interfaces. The earliest of this was invented in 1989 by Richard A. Norman, who was at the University of Utah, and it's called the Utah Array. These are implanted devices. They've been in use since 2004. Much of the implantable device field is focused on regaining functionality for people who have lost the use of parts of their body. There are also non-invasive, non-implanted devices which can read parts of the brain, but which are not then sending feedback to the brain. So it's read-only, basically, of the brain. Brain-computer interfaces use microelectrodes to detect signals from the cerebral motor cortex. They're mostly used in healthcare. Some have been applied to video games as well. I did watch a video about the top 7 brain-computer interface companies. Of course, there's Neuralink, which is Elon Musk's company. That company uses computer-assisted implantation. The procedure takes under 1 hour. The battery life of the device is 1 day. And there have been allegations of, well, I forget if it's allegations, but that's what I'll say here since I can't remember, animal welfare violations in its development. There is a company called BlackRock Neurotech, and BlackRock Neurotech also partners with another company called ClearPoint Neuro. Now, I want to put an asterisk right here and clarify that according to BlackRock Neurotech's company website, they are not owned by or affiliated with BlackRock Investments. So I want to clarify that. I know my mind went there immediately. I'm sure a lot of people's minds go there too. There are some companies which are using catheters to install these implants into blood vessels. So this would be not open brain surgery, but only one company called Synchron is really doing that one. And all of the rest of these, it is an open brain surgery procedure. So that is going to limit the possibility of anybody receiving an implant without their knowledge. You would lose at least an hour, and then there's the healing time. Opening up somebody's skull, you would notice if that had been done to you, unless you're losing like days or weeks at a time, which some people are, and in which case you would want to look for scars and other telltale signs. BlackRock Neurotech is going to be launching commercial devices sometime in 2024, and that is going to mark the first instances of such implants being used outside of an academic setting. BCIs create feedback between the brain and computer in a way that can be reciprocal. So with an implanted device, it would be reciprocal, and with external non-implanted devices, as I mentioned before, the brain data is read-only. So now I'm going to talk about the similarity of symptoms between microwave exposure and cerebral edema. When you are dealing with something like having voices in your head, it's going to be very important to track your symptoms and to compare them against different factors. So, for example, I had already mentioned with TMS what those symptoms are. I'm not saying that you're not experiencing voices in your head because of V2K technology. But if you think that is happening, you really need to make sure that you've eliminated every other possible option, every other possible source, so that you can address the underlying issues that you're experiencing and mitigate the overall effect that it's having on your life. If all of these factors stop being an issue and are no longer affecting your life, then basically you've beat the condition. So symptoms of microwave exposure include dyspepsia, that's like nausea and vomiting, headache, fatigue, lethargy, lassitude, that's just a general like feeling of being run down, not being able to get out of bed easily. You'll experience sleep disturbance, so it could be excitement and dreams. There could be memory loss or irritability. People who were chronically exposed to microwave radiation in a workplace setting had symptoms that subsided after they were removed from that exposure. And they did experience some psychiatric symptoms like somatization, obsessive compulsivity, paranoid ideation, and psychoticism. With cerebral edema, which you can experience at high altitudes, from my own personal experience, I observed that certain aspects of what was going on with me got much worse when I was at high altitudes. I was hearing and getting a lot more vivid things cropping up in my brain. Some of the Symptoms of cerebral edema are nausea, vomiting, headaches, again, lethargy, lassitude, or fatigue, altered mental states. So that's where your psychotic ideation or delusions come into play. That's what they're talking about with altered mental states. Confusion, coma, or seizure. Another factor to consider would be carbon monoxide poisoning. There have been reported cases. There was one very infamous Reddit thread in which the person was leaving themselves notes in a different kind of handwriting, and they thought somebody was breaking into their apartment. And it turned out that they had a carbon monoxide leak, and it was affecting their cognitive function. So there are testing devices. Obviously, there are carbon monoxide detectors. As far as microwave radiation, there are also devices. As far as microwave radiation, there are devices available at around the $25 range on Amazon that, from the reviews, seem to have good functionality. So if you think these are things that are possibly going on, you should definitely look into getting a testing device and confirming whether or not that's the case. Sometimes there will be two things going on at the same time that might both be related to being targeted, but which are not actually related to each other. So, for example, microwave radiation has been infamously used to control people's behavior. You have, even as recent as a few years ago, we have the Havana syndrome reports. Those very much look like microwave radiation. In the 50s and 60s, the Soviets, and this is documented in the Justison paper, Microwaves and Behavior, the Soviets were found to be beaming microwave radiation at the American embassy. So these things are real, they do happen to people, but it's important to verify with scientific research on your own what may or may not actually be occurring in your personal situation. I hope that this has been helpful to some of you out there. Please let me know your thoughts. All of my socials for this particular podcast, I have Instagram, I have a Gmail address, and I also have the YouTube channel, and they're all at Pale Threshold. So it's easy to find me. I'm not trying to put myself out there very far, admittedly. But do please feel free to reach out and talk to me about these things. I would love to hear your stories. And until next time, never fear the Pale Threshold. Hello, and welcome back to the Pale Threshold. Today we're going to be talking about the role of mental illness in gangstalking phenomena. First, I want to talk about comorbidities, such as anxiety disorders and psychosis and delusions. These conditions can be the source of the perceived gangstalking phenomena, but that is not necessarily the case. So it's going to be very important to document concrete phenomena, like persistently being followed by the same people, if people are taking pictures of you, making notes of that, persistently having dreams about the same person, or other unexplainable events that have actually happened. You might be getting information through V2K, but this information is unreliable, and it must be verifiable to be useful. If possible, you want to pin down the source of your personal V2K triggers. Find out how that information is being transmitted to you, and if there are biological or psychological aspects that are contributing to that. Any mental illness has the potential to be used against the target. So make sure that you are seeing a licensed mental health professional that you trust. Keep looking for somebody until you find a person who's a good fit. That is so crucial, especially because one of the weapons that is targeted against people is involuntary commitment, getting 5150'd. You don't have to be exhibiting mental illness to be committed, but it does make it a lot easier for the gang stalkers to do that if you are already exhibiting symptoms of mental illness. This is especially true in intimate gang stalking. So that would be where you're being gang stalked by a partner, an ex-partner, a family member, or I would even classify employers as being part of that intimate gang stalking. Next, I'm going to talk about the role of narcissistic personality disorder in gang stalking. Gang stalkers are often narcissists. They're intent on proving they are right at the expense of the targets. They have to have their narrative be believed. And there is a lack of concern for the well-being of the targeted individual, especially in cases of intimate gang stalking. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of narcissistic supply in gang stalking phenomena. So there's going to be a lot of gaslighting, making it appear as though all of the manifestations of the gang stalking are related to mental illness in order to get that person committed, or to make the person believe that gang stalking is not occurring. This is why it is so important when concrete phenomena are occurring to document them and to be very critical of anything that's coming through as V2K. Mechanisms exist by which mental illness is induced in order to control the behavior of targeted individuals. So I discussed in the previous episode about V2K, different ways that inflammation can be induced in the brain. And of course, it's very important to understand what the mechanisms are behind your own phenomena. Now, this will make it much easier to implant ideas in the mind of the target as well. It's less important to understand exactly what is going on and more important to figure out what is specific to your case in order to effectively treat the symptoms. Because if you are not being affected by the gang stalking, it doesn't matter if it's occurring or not. There's CBTP, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis. This will help you work through any delusions that are coming through, treating sources of brain inflammation, abstinence from substances like cannabis, which can exacerbate psychosis symptoms, and abstinence from substances which can cloud judgment and cognitive processes so that you're able to effectively combat the gang stalking as it's manifesting in your life. And when I say combat the gang stalking, I'm talking primarily about combating its effect on your life. It's important to understand the limitations of being able to control the behavior of others and the sovereignty that you have in the situation. Obviously, anyone involved in the gang stalking will be trying to exploit substances as a means of control. So be very kind to yourself if you are having a hard time quitting. Watch out for narcissistic behavior in the people around you. Those people are very caught up in polarized thought, in which one party is 100% in the right and the other party is 100% in the wrong. They're much more likely to take part in gang stalking activities because they love drama and creating problems for others in order to control them. And they want to feel powerful, such that even if they are also targeted, they will take part in the gang stalking. One of the best ways to combat gang stalking is cutting off narcissistic supply. This is especially true for intimate gang stalking cases. Reduce participation in social media platforms. It's important to have enough of a social media presence that you have some proof of what your actual personality is like. But we're getting to a point now where people are starting to understand that Nothing that they see online is an accurate reflection of somebody's true personality. Observe whom around you has narcissistic tendencies. These people are only as dangerous as you allow them into your circles. So now let's take a step back and re-examine the social climate in which this is occurring. Gangstalking far predates the global pandemic, but the conditions created by that particular event have primed all of us to be more socially isolated and unsure of appropriate social interaction, hyperpolarized in regards to politics and current global events, and connected through the artifice of online interaction while disconnecting from the realities of the modern world. It's important to shift one's view to accurately perceive one's surroundings. Don't believe the hype. Hype machines are huge right now and a prime tool for gang stalkers to spread misinformation about targets. Overall, we need to focus on being much more righteous to one another. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Pulp Fiction, but maybe you remember the diner scene in which Tim Roth and Holly Hunter are trying to rob everyone in the diner, and Samuel L. Jackson tells them to chill out. We're all going to do our best to be a bunch of Fonzies right now. Not everyone's going to be on board with that. It is possible to have compassion for someone's situation without having to engage with their energy. Work on disengaging energetically from others in public while maintaining an openness to connection. Surely this is easier said than done, and I will be covering some of these techniques in a different episode. This is especially important in intimate gang stalking situations, where a crucial member of one's support system is actively trying to get the target committed. Ideally, you will be able to go no contact with this person, cutting off their narcissistic supply. But this is not always realistic, and I understand that. If you are having trouble going no contact with this person, do your best to set boundaries with them and reinforce those boundaries. I would love to hear all of your thoughts about the topics that I've covered today. All of my socials that I have are at Pale Threshold. So that's my Gmail, that's the YouTube, and the Instagram. Please do contact me and let me know your thoughts. Remember to be gentle with yourself, be gentle with others, and never fear the pale threshold. Welcome back to The Pale Threshold. Today we're going to be talking about fostering genuine connection with others. We cannot entirely control the perceptions of other people about us. Things like our motivations, our desires and wants, and our goals. The only thing you can do is try your best to put out into the world that which you would like to see return. Mitigate your interactions with others. Not everyone is meant for us. Additionally, some people will be part of your journey for a period of time, but aren't meant to be there for the long haul. That doesn't mean you are using that person, nor does it give you license to use people. Let's talk about ulterior motives in our interactions. Sometimes these can be very subtle, but they will often reveal themselves over time. Often these ulterior motives are sexually motivated. And I do want to just insert here that having people in what's called the friend zone is not a good idea, because you're not able to foster a genuine connection to that other person. You will be able to foster deeper understanding and better overall connection with people who do not already have a master plan for your place in their life. This means when you find out what someone's motives are, if they are counter or contradictory to your own personal goals, you should start putting more space between yourself and that person. You don't have to immediately ghost someone who does not have your best interests at heart, but don't be as open with your energy and time. Finding the best people with whom to surround yourself. Put yourself in situations where you are much more likely to meet the people that are going to be a good surrounding and support group for you. This involves a lot of legwork, research, and motivation. Overall, it will be worth the investment if you go about it in the right way. Becoming a regular. When you find those places where you connect with the energy and people well, make a point of getting to know them better. You don't have to go every day or every week. In some instances, it works better if your visits are spread out over a longer period of time. Sometimes people who are considered regulars are their presence is kind of taken for granted. So keep that in mind too. This process can take some time, months or years, even if an environment is a good fit for you. Make a lasting impression. People are much more likely to remember something overwhelmingly negative over something positive. That doesn't mean making a bad example of yourself is the correct course of action, of course. Have a signature look, style, mannerism, which immediately sets you apart, such that someone could easily recognize you from across the room. This also means if you don't want to be recognized, you can hide that attribute. It is possible to be kind without being a pushover. People think if you are nice, you will give them anything they want, no questions asked. It's okay to have your own personal criteria for boundaries. Sometimes an outright refusal will trigger defensive behavior. It might be easier to give a soft answer like maybe while you make your getaway. I hope that these tips and tricks that I have given you today for fostering better connections with other people are helpful. Please let me know your thoughts. My socials are all at Pale Threshold, so that's my Gmail, the YouTube, and the Instagram. I would love to hear more from you about this subject. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there, and as always, never fear the pale threshold.